Sophia Ramirez had never known a life without the smell of oil and the hum of engines echoing through her days. Her earliest memory was of sitting on her father's knee while he adjusted the carburetor of an old Chevelle, her tiny, hands covered in grease, before she could spell her name. By the time she was 12, she could change spark plugs faster than most grown men in town. Her father, Miguel Ramirez, owned a small but honest performance garage in a quiet corner of Ventura County, California, where word of mouth was stronger than any billboard. When Sophia turned 16, she rebuilt her first V8 engine from the scrap heap behind the shop. Miguel watched proudly as she tightened bolts with precision and confidence that defied her age. He always told her that an engine would speak if you just learned to listen. By 23, Sophia had taken over Ramirez Auto and Performance, turning the dusty old shop into a clean, organized haven for high-performance cars and everyday drivers alike. Her name carried weight in the small community, but outside of it, she was just another mechanic fighting to stay afloat. On an unusually cool Tuesday morning, Sophia found herself standing at the shop's wide-open bay door, sipping black coffee, when a tow truck pulled up with a sleek, matte black McLaren 720S on its flatbed. She nearly dropped her cup. Exotic cars were rare in her world, where trucks and classic Mustangs were the usual fare. The driver hopped out, paperwork in hand, and gave her a sympathetic nod as he unloaded the car. She knew right away this wasn't just another tune-up. This was a test of everything she knew. Stepping closer, Sophia ran her hand over the carbon fiber hood, fingers brushing away a thin layer of dust that had settled during the tow. She circled the car slowly, noting the custom wheels, the spotless interior visible through the tinted glass. Her mind raced with possibilities. It could be an ECU failure, a sensor glitch, or something deeper, something that might need more than parts. It might need the intuition her father drilled into her for years. She inhaled sharply and decided she'd find out soon enough. Before she could lift the hood, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz slid to a stop outside the shop. Out stepped a tall, sharply dressed man with salt and pepper hair and sunglasses worth more than her entire week's revenue. Conrad Fletcher, CEO of Fletcher Auto Group, was known around town as a kingmaker in the high-end auto world. Sophia had only heard rumors about his ego and his temper, but seeing him strut across her concrete floor made every warning feel real. He barely looked at her as he scanned the dusty shop. Conrad's polished shoes clicked against the floor as he stopped in front of the McLaren, eyes hidden behind his glasses. "You're the mechanic?" he asked, his tone dancing between disbelief and amusement. Sophia straightened her back, lifting her chin as she 2-6 tucked her rag into her back pocket. "Yes, sir. Sophia Ramirez, owner and lead." "Mechanic," she said, steady and calm. Conrad's smirk widened as he pulled a folded diagnostic report from his tailored jacket and tossed it onto the hood like a piece of trash. Sophia picked it up carefully, unfolding it to see the familiar numbers and error codes from an uptown performance shop. "This engine is a mess," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Every expert I paid said it's toast, thought I'd give the local flavor a shot. You know, charity work." He chuckled, glancing around her modest garage, his eyes taking in the old workbench, the faded family photos pinned above it, and the neat rows of labeled tools she'd organized herself. Sophia said nothing. She had learned early that the engine would speak louder than she ever could. "I'll fix it," she said simply. Conrad raised an eyebrow, laughter hidden behind his scoff. "You? You're what? 25? I bet. You've never even tuned a hypercar like this. Do yourself a favor, little Miss Mechanic. Don't scratch the paint when you give up and push it back outside," he said, voice low enough to sting but loud enough to humiliate. Sophia's jaw tightened. She knew men like Conrad, born with money, blind to skill unless it came wrapped in a fancy degree. But his words would fuel her fire more than they'd douse it. She popped the hood and braced herself for the puzzle inside. The McLaren's heart was a masterpiece of engineering: twin turbocharged V8, custom intake, modified exhaust. She traced the wires with her fingers, the familiar hiss of the engine's silence daring her to fail. Sophia pulled out her notebook, scribbling ideas and mapping a plan. She would not rush. Conrad watched her, arms folded, phone in hand as he scrolled, only glancing up to smirk whenever she asked the tow truck driver for more light. Hours passed. Sophia worked methodically, stripping panels, checking lines, isolating sensors one by one. Her father's old socket set clinked beside her as she moved from one side to the other, her braid slipping over her shoulder every time she leaned into the bay. She found the culprit hidden deep, a custom ECU chip meant to unlock more power, but sloppily, soldered by someone with more ego than experience. One tiny crack in the connection was enough to silence the entire beast. She whistled low, shaking her head at the arrogance. Sophia dug into her stash of spare parts. She didn't have a new ECU chip on hand. Few shops did, but she knew how to clean the connection and bridge the circuit just long enough to run tests. Her soldering iron hissed when it touched metal, a small puff of smoke drifting up toward the flickering ceiling light. She whispered a quiet thanks to her father for teaching her to solder when she was barely tall enough to see the workbench. She could almost hear him laugh, telling her slow hands, steady breath. Outside the shop, Conrad yawned dramatically, tapping his watch for no one but himself. His phone calls grew louder, his jokes sharper as he reminded whoever was on the other end that he was watching the town's charity case play. Pretend mechanic. Sophia tuned him out. Her focus narrowed to the engine, the solder cooling under her fingertips. She double-checked the circuit, tapped the ignition wire lightly, and watched the small LED flicker back to life. A grin tugged at the corner of her mouth as she exhaled the breath she'd held for hours. Satisfied with her patch, she closed the hood gently and wiped her hands on her rag. Conrad noticed her stand up and sauntered over, smugness dripping from every syllable. "Well, done wasting time. I'd love to tow this to a real specialist." "Before dinner," he said. Sophia ignored him, sliding into the McLaren's driver's seat. The leather still smelled new, the dashboard lights blinking like an impatient heartbeat. She placed her hands on the wheel, remembering every engine she'd coaxed back to life, every late night spent learning what textbooks couldn't teach. She turned the key, breath caught in her chest. The garage fell silent. Conrad's voice paused mid-insult as the McLaren coughed once, then roared awake. The twin turbos whirred, the exhaust humming like a wild animal, stretching its legs. Sophia's grin widened as she revved it. Gently, the RPM gauge dancing with a confidence that matched her own. Conrad stepped back, sunglasses sliding down his nose as he stared in disbelief. For the first time that day, he said nothing at all. The McLaren spoke for her, each purr a reminder that skill knows no title. Sophia let the engine idle, stepping out with her hands tucked in her back pockets. Conrad approached slowly, eyes flicking from the car to her and back again. "How did you—" he stuttered, but the words died on his tongue. Sophia didn't need him to finish. She scribbled a neat invoice, handed it to him, and nodded toward the open highway outside the shop. "Try not to blow it up this time," she said softly, her voice calm but steel-edged. Conrad's face burned red with a mix of shame and awe as he took the paper. When the McLaren pulled away moments later, its growl echoing down Main Street, Sophia leaned against the shop door, heart racing. She knew the world wouldn't change overnight. People like Conrad would always underestimate people like her. But that engine's roar was her promise, her father's lessons, her stubborn spirit, and her love for the hum of machines would always drown out the noise of doubt. She wiped her hands clean one last time and turned off the lights, ready for whatever roared through her garage. Next, Sophia woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing non-stop on her nightstand. She rubbed her eyes, the soreness in her hands reminding her that she'd spent half the night cleaning the shop after Conrad's McLaren roared off into the dark. She answered groggily, only to hear her assistant, Leo, practically yelling
Apparently,
through the speaker. The local news had picked up her story overnight. Conrad Fletcher's PR team tried to spin it, but the truth slipped through. The small-town mechanic, who embarrassed a big-shot CEO. She pulled her hair into a messy bun and stepped into the garage, the smell of oil, and last night's coffee grounding her more than any headline ever could. Leo had printed out a stack of emails from people, wanting her to look at their cars. Everything from old farm trucks to classic muscle cars that hadn't run in decades. Sophia flipped through them, her fingers lingering on one sent by someone named Meredith Fletcher. She frowned at the familiar last name, her curiosity fighting against the instinct to toss it aside with the spam. Meredith Fletcher's message was simple but direct. She needed help with a custom project, something about restoring a collection of vintage engines for a charity auction. Sophia's first thought was that it was a joke, maybe Conrad's idea of revenge or mockery, but her gut told her to read every word carefully. The tone wasn't arrogant, it was sincere, almost apologetic. She tucked the paper into her pocket and turned back to the shop floor, telling herself she'd think about it after the next oil change and brake job. Later that afternoon, a sleek blue Tesla pulled up to the shop, kicking up dust on the old asphalt. Out stepped a woman in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled into a neat twist, expensive sunglasses perched on her head instead of her eyes. Meredith Fletcher didn't look anything like her. Brother Conrad. There was no cold arrogance in her posture, just a quiet confidence and a clear sense that she didn't belong in a dusty auto shop. She greeted Sophia with a warm smile, extending a manicured hand that smelled faintly of expensive soap. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by in person," Meredith said, her eyes scanning the garage with genuine curiosity instead of judgment. Sophia shrugged, wiping her hands on her rag before shaking Meredith's hand. They talked about cars first. Old Fords, classic Jaguars, engines that had stories older than both of them combined. Slowly, Meredith explained her real reason for being there. She ran a foundation that auctioned vintage cars to raise money for underfunded trade schools, hoping to give kids like Sophia once was a better shot. Sophia listened, arms crossed, wary but intrigued. Meredith spoke about their father, a man who'd loved cars just as much as Miguel Ramirez had, a man who'd taught Conrad and her both how to change tires and polish chrome, but who never thought to pass on the deeper love of fixing things to his daughter. Meredith confessed that her brother's attitude embarrassed her more than she could say. She apologized for Conrad's arrogance, her eyes honest when she asked Sophia to consider partnering on the project despite the past. That night, Sophia sat at her old kitchen table, paperwork spread in front of her alongside her father's battered thermos full of strong coffee. She read every line of Meredith's proposal twice, maybe 3 times, her pencil tapping the wood rhythmically. The money would help her expand the garage, hire more local kids hungry to learn the craft, replace the old lift that squealed every time she hoisted a truck overhead. But it was more than money. It was respect, a chance to prove to herself that small-town talent could shine on a big stage. By morning, she signed the papers and faxed them back, heart thumping as she hit send. Within a week, her dusty garage transformed into something she'd only dreamed of. Trucks delivered crates of rare engines and parts she'd never handled before. Shelby blocks, original carburetors, and pristine chrome headers wrapped in layers of protective foam. Leo practically danced around the garage, organizing the chaos as Sophia sketched out timelines and parts lists. They were her mechanics again, but now they were part of something bigger than patching up neighborhood cars. Meredith visited often, bringing fresh pastries and coffee instead of paperwork. She sat cross-legged on a workbench while Sophia worked, asking questions about spark, plug gaps, and piston rings, like a student eager to catch up on a lost education. For the first time in her life, Sophia felt her knowledge respected by someone whose last name didn't immediately buy them influence. They laughed together, joked about the mess in the shop, and slowly built a quiet friendship over gaskets and wrenches and long nights under humming shop lights. One evening, as Sophia and Meredith pored over an old blueprint for a 1965 Shelby GT350, Conrad Fletcher's name came up again. Meredith hesitated, then asked if Sophia would be willing to show him the garage's progress. Sophia's first instinct was a hard no. The memory of his smirk and dismissive tone still clung to her like oil on her coveralls. But something in Meredith's hopeful expression softened her. She thought about what her father would say, that real respect was earned, not demanded, and that sometimes you had to show people your worth twice. A week later, Conrad stepped into Ramirez Auto and Performance for the second time in his life. This time, the smell of oil and the low rumble of an engine test didn't make him roll his eyes. Instead, he walked slower, taking in the clean, organized chaos of an expanded shop floor, new lifts gleaming beside the old ones Sophia's father once used. He found Sophia bent over a polished V8, her braid flicked over her shoulder as she adjusted timing gears with steady hands. He cleared his throat, awkwardly, an apology on his lips before he could stop it. He tried to offer compliments that fell out stiff and half-finished, but Sophia didn't need his praise. Showed him the charity cars instead. Row after row of classic machines brought back to life under her guidance and the hands of her new apprentices. Neighborhood kids she'd taken in after school learned to polish chrome, tune carburetors, and keep a shop floor clean enough to eat off. Conrad nodded silently, hands stuffed into his pockets as if he couldn't figure out where to put them without looking small. That night, after Conrad left with promises to never underestimate her again, Sophia stayed behind alone in the quiet shop. She traced her father's name carved into the old workbench, her breath fogging under the cool nightlights. She thought about everything that had brought her here, her stubbornness, her father's voice in her head, the roar of an engine proving her. Right when no one else would listen, she realized she didn't need to prove herself to anyone anymore. Her hands and heart had done it for her. A month later, the charity auction drew crowds bigger than Sophia ever imagined. Journalists wrote about the mechanic who embarrassed a CEO and then rebuilt his family's legacy. Bidders flew in for a chance to own a piece of history reborn by Ramirez Auto and Performance. Sophia stood at the back of the auction hall, her coveralls swapped for a simple black dress that still smelled faintly of motor oil. Meredith squeezed her hand as the final car sold for triple its expected value, every dollar going back to the next generation of kids who dreamed in gears and grease. As the night wound down, Sophia stepped outside into the warm California evening. The hum of engines, the soft laughter of the crowd behind her, and the smell of polished chrome reminded her that sometimes you fix more than broken cars. You fix pride, you fix bridges, and you fix the stories people tell about who belongs where. She breathed in deep, the city lights blurring at the edges of her tired eyes. When the last bid was called and the lights dimmed, she turned back to her shop, ready to build again, one engine, one chance, one roar at a time.